Hi, I'm Michelle Shingler, the editor-in-chief of Foreword Reviews. Thank you for tuning in to Petit Foreword, our bite-sized interviews with indie authors. Today, we're speaking with Ken Kalfus, a National Book Award nominee whose highly anticipated latest novel, 2 a.m. in Little America, released last week. It's the story of a U.S. refugee who fled acute political turmoil and who now leads a precarious life between nations. He witnesses as other nations descend into their own forms of chaos and xenophobia, too. It's a gorgeously written and eerily prescient story, both heartbreaking and sobering. Ken, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we meet Ron on a rooftop in a scene that strongly evokes David and Bathsheba. His sense of isolation is acute. Hungry for human connection, he skirts a dangerous edge. How are audiences meant to feel about Ron's transgression or his near transgression and its implications?
So to be explicit, the transgression is that he's doing work on a roof. He sees a woman leaving the shower. He watches her leave the shower. He gets a good look too. And in that respect, it's like the story of David and Bathsheba, which I wasn't actually thinking of at the time. But it's definitely a transgression of some degree. As he himself feels, he feels sorry about it, but he also feels there's no harm done, he thinks. And he goes on with he goes on with his life. But he discovers it does have some implications for his future. It's part of the motive that sets the plot going, and his involvement with or without may or may not be this woman who he had seen.
There's no indication of Ron's prosopagnosia prior to his becoming a refugee. What's at the root of his inability or unwillingness to recognize people's faces long term?
Okay, so what happens to him, and this is sort of the sort of slight magical realist element, is after seeing this woman, after imparting his male gaze upon this woman leaving the shower, committing this transgression, he's cursed by the inability to ever recognize the woman again. So he's seen this woman, and then he's not sure whether he's ever seen. Then he sees her in the street. He may or may not be sure whether it's actually her or not. And this face blindness, that word probably, I know it. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Carries on into his further life as a migrant. So in the first, his face blindness is partly a curse, but partly the derangement of being a refugee or a migrant in this world. That he lives in a world that's no longer familiar to him, because he's no longer at home, because America is no longer as important to the world as it once was, and he can't recognize anybody, or it's particularly women who he thinks may be this woman. So this carries on through the novel, and it's one of the elements of his alienation from his own life.
In the novel, Americans abroad form enclaves where markers of their former cultures and political allegiances become important to them, including replicas of Targets and Walmarts. But it's also clear that this kind of tribalism and consumerism contributed to America's dissolution in the first place. Why do you think Ron's communities find it so difficult to let go of the poisons that set them adrift?
Why do we find it so difficult to let go of our poisons, of our tribalism? I mean, this is a novel that's very much inspired by by what's happening in our country, and I want to make clear that this is not a both siderism novel. What I'm interested in this novel is that when we encounter people, in our own community or in our own country, who see objective facts differently than we do, or deny it, but we see it as objective facts. it creates a kind of derangement in our minds, our ability, we feel alienated, not only from them, but from us, what we think of as objective truth. And there's no, in my mind, there's no question about why we have this issue right now. But that my point of my novel is not to make that not to make an argument about who's the fool. Who's at the fault. I'm a novelist, not a political writer. I'm trying to describe how it feels in our mental state to live in a place where you can't even agree on matters of fact.
So in the novel, Ron also finds himself treated abroad the way that so many refugees are today, including in the US, with little empathy and a lot of resentment. Your novel does some powerful work reminding people of our shared humanity, but what else do you think can be done to increase care for those subject to the world's changing borders?
So again, I'm not offering a 5-point plan to deal with the global issue of forced migration, which is one of the hallmarks of our time. But I will say, as a novelist, what all novelists want to do at some basic level is get across the idea of our shared humanity. And when you write a novel, you're creating characters, and you're hoping, right? And even a novelist like myself, who somewhat non-conventional or postmodern, I still want people to understand that there is a shared humanity. And when we look at issues in our world, including the issues of forced migration, we remind ourselves that every one of these people are individuals, families, and that the things that have happened to them that put them on the boats across the Mediterranean or forced in the Sonora Desert in Mexico, or whatever the situation is, having real people with real histories, with real problems that predate the problems that sent them abroad in the first place. And I'm heartened. I'm actually, by the way, the Ukrainians who have migrated from, who have been forced out, who have left or fled Ukraine, have been largely welcomed in the West. And I obviously there are obvious reasons why that has been. I hope what we take from it, though, is all of us are individuals. All of us have these have histories and lives, and constantly a universe among ourselves. And as we address these issues, I hope we can get into that.
Why is it so much easier for Ron to fathom that a faction leader might become violent against him than it is for him to fathom that a faction leader might become violent toward his pet?
Right. So there's a scene. One of the three stories in the novel has to do with while Ron's abroad in his enclave, he not only runs into these militias, these American gangsters, but he also adopts a dog, and the dog ends up playing a role in the story, and I think sometimes we even gangsters, we feel something about dogs, about cats, about our pets, that we can in a way accept man's inhumanity to man. It's sometimes harder to accept man's inhumanity to a nice defenseless dog, and like, why are we like that? That's part of the irony of our the way we treat each other. There's a comic element there. There's a comic element. I should add that I've tried to impose, that I've tried to make this novel some degree funny, even though the circumstances described as tragic, and that's one of the comic elements. Comic ironies of the situation.
So this is your choice question. It's what are you working on next, or what are you reading right now?
Okay, so I never like to talk about what I'm working on, because very often it doesn't work out. I don't even to my friends and my family that I'm working on. But the last I've just finished recently reading a book called Not 1 Inch, which is a history of relations between the West and Russia since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I've lived in Russia. I lived in Moscow for 4 years in the 90s, and two of my books are set in Russia, and I have a strong interest in Russian history and that kind of thing. And I lived in Moscow during the Yeltsin years when things were starting to fall apart there, and before Putin came. So this new book, it's called Not 1 Inch. It's a historian's account of what the West did, what NATO expansion, Russia's own mistakes, Yeltsin's, the war in Chechnya, and how we got to this point where we have Ukrainian cities being bombed by Putin's troops. But it's fascinating reading, and recent it's history that I lived through. You're a little younger than I am, Michelle, so it's maybe more like ancient history to you, but to me it's history I lived through. I recommended. The author's name is M.E. Sarot, Sarat. There you go, right over me. It looks like back this mirror image. Yeah. I don't know if it's showing in your screen, but anyway, it actually reads left to right directly. But it's a fine book, and I do read a lot of history, and I also read a lot of novels, of course. I'm always reading.
Yeah.
I see. So looking from the back of you, looking from the shelves behind you, I see you are too. I love those. I love the way you organize your books.
It's a little sparse right now.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. And everyone should go out and get a copy of 2 A.M. in a Little America. It came out last week. It's a fabulous novel, and we're so grateful that you spoke with us today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the questions and for the very thoughtful article you wrote about the book. Thanks so much, Michelle.
No problem.